Okay, and then really what you need is study 2. Your study 2 is exactly what you did on finding 5, because I was the one who wrote the script, so I wrote it to match this. This table goes to study 1, so you don't need even to care about it. As you can see, the APA formatting is different from what we're doing. Again, remember, it's a style sheet that the journal is using. It's still APA, but it's just slightly. Again, in figure 1, also study 1, we don't care. But what we care is results in discussion of study 2. So when you write your design and materials, these are your materials. They're right here. Okay, so you can count them and you can use them as examples. And this is the figure. That's how it should look like, that you will need for your lab 2. So what I'm asking you to do for Thursday, and asking you to convey, and I'll email it, of course, convey it to your partners, is to read this article, glancing through study 1, focusing on introduction, study 2 and general discussion, and then answer the 8 questions that are posted for you in section, is it section 5? Let's stop that and share. Okay. Blackboard. So 5, reading articles in cognitive psychology. If you go here, if here is your chapter 6, long-term memory. If you click on that, here is the article, the one that I just showed you, and these are the questions. So I'm asking you to do this in preparation for the time that we will spend the day after tomorrow talking about this article, to get you to write better for your lab 2 report. Of course, on the 22nd, which is next Thursday, we will actually talk about your drafts. That's not what I'm asking you to do for this Thursday. I'm asking you just to read the article minus study 1 and answer the questions. Does anybody have any questions so far before I move on to the actual stuff for today? Okay, good. Now we're ready to start chapter 6. Chapter 6 is lovely, actually. Besides language, this is one of my favorites, and I think many students actually like it too. Just read and answer the questions. Yes, Karen, yes, just read the article minus study 1 and answer the 8 questions, and then have them ready. Maybe do it in your Google Doc. That will be easier. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the long-term memory and the continuation of information processing approach to memory, which means we're going to be talking about different memory stores connected with arrows, right? And in particular, we will talk about the implicit versus explicit memory. You'll see a lot of terminology that has been sort of used, but they sort of mean the same. So implicit sometimes is called procedural memory. It's not quite right, because there are other types of implicit memories beside procedural. So that's why I'm trying to be more precise. And declarative, explicit memory. Then we will continue our approach, a 3-stage approach of encoding, storage, and retrieval. I don't think we're going to get to retrieval, unlikely. And I will introduce the 7-principle framework for memory. The book does a good job, but it just doesn't package it this way. So it's really it's very compatible. What I'm going to say is very compatible with the book, but McDonald and Cooper Cutting just don't use this terminology of principles or laws. And I do, because I teach psychology of memory as well, and that really works well. So I sort of borrowed it from my other class where we spend the entire semester on memory. So if you guys are interested in memory, you should consider this as a Psi 385, Psychology of Memory. In fact, it's on this semester. It was supposed to be taught by my colleague, Tim Ricker, who unfortunately left CSI and went somewhere else. So a different instructor is teaching it. Usually we offer it every year to year and a half. I often teach it. This time I'm not. It's, of course, this is an elective, but if you are BS, Bachelor of Science in Psychology, you can take 385 as one of the required courses for BS. The BA obviously is just an elective. Okay, goody. So this is the figure or flow chart for all kinds of memories. Obviously, you guys recognize short-term memory and working memory that we talked about last week. And today, we will move on to the left, to the long-term memory. And as you can see, this is our information processing approach in action. We get a bunch of boxes with arrows. And just like with the short-term memory, Atkinson and Schifrin, a working memory, Alan Baddeley, there is a person whose name is associated with this idea of a long-term memory. And I'm not going to talk about him. His name is Tolling. And he is 93 years old and he is still alive. Of course, he's retired. He's not doing much work. So if you go to the site that I've used before, it's called Go Cognitive. You can actually watch several interviews with Endel Tolling. He's actually an Estonian. That is, he was born in Estonia and then moved from various countries to Canada, where he became one of the prominent psychologists in cognitive psychology. So he's the one who is credited with the idea that long-term memory is also not sort of unitary. Oops, did we go too far? No, we are okay. Okay, good. All right, so just a very quick 30-second introduction, and then I'll get to more details about that. Is, again, remember, terminology might be a little bit confusing, but just think about explicit memory and implicit memory. So the different types, this is actually about knowledge. Now, what we know about the world and what we know about ourselves. So this is very closely related to this chapter, I guess it's going to be chapter 10, which is on concepts. I mean, how do we acquire, store, and use knowledge? Really, that's what long-term memory is. It's our storage for knowledge, right? And here, this is the fundamental difference between explicit memory and implicit memory. So think about explicit memory, which is also known as declarative, because you declare kind of stuff. This is something, facts that we know about the world, both in its physical aspect and its social aspect. It includes things like semantics, what the words mean, numbers, symbols, attributes or characteristics that objects possess, categories they belong to, and so on and so forth. So it also includes the knowledge of events and context in which they take place. The knowledge of events would be one type of memory. The context in which these events took place would be another type of memory. So usually when we talk about declarative or explicit memory, we talk about propositions. And that's here at the bottom. So what's a proposition? Well, it's a sentence, an utterance that has this form, noun, verb, noun, or noun, verb. Okay? So think about semantics, meanings of words. What does the word blunt mean? Well, blunt means dull, right? We also know, think about numbers, that 3 is less than 4, right? Or we can think of things like something that's red and octagonal in shape is a stop sign. Or we know that Chevys are cars or automobiles. Or we can create a completely crazy sentence that I will use. A hippie touched a debutante. Now, hippie, it's a strange looking person from 1980s, and debutante is the young woman who's entering the world. So all of that would be declarative or explicit knowledge. And we're going to be using these propositions to describe this knowledge. So if I were to ask you a question, what did you have for dinner last night? You would say, well, I had chicken for dinner. That's a proposition, right? So it's a piece of knowledge. When we talk about procedural, well, implicit, again, be careful. Now, this has to do with rules and skills. So in this case, we have to kind of transform the declarative explicit knowledge. It includes things like mathematical operations, the rules of grammar. Why do we say he runs and not he run, which is going to be ungrammatical English? Judgments, strategies for forming percepts, right? And they are always, they're mostly let's go back. Mostly represented in something called productions. And productions are different from propositions, right? You can see that right to left. And productions have a form of if-then format. So we can say something like, if you want to know how likable a person is, and you already know some of his or her personality traits, then count a number of his or her desirable traits. So you like somebody because this person is warm, dependable, loving. Okay. Or you can say, if you want to tie a necktie, okay, you're gonna drape it around your neck, and then you will put the long piece into a knot and then thread the short piece through the knot and stuff like that. So if then, again, quite different from noun, verb, noun. Okay, so let's start with the declarative memory as our first approach to the long-term memory. As you can see, there are a bunch of subtypes. That's why we don't want to call non-declarative implicit memory procedural, because procedural is just one of them. There's also perceptual stuff. There's classical conditioning that you're familiar with already. We talked about it. Maybe something that has to do with learning. Excuse me. I don't think I'll be talking about this last one at all, but I want you to sort of get some idea about the first three. So let's start with procedural. All right. Think about skills again. Easy. I mean, how do you ride a bike? If you have a child, you don't sort of explain it. Well, get into the saddle, put your feet on the pedals. No, you actually show them how to do that. I already mentioned language. Language is one of those non-declarative procedural types. That's why we don't get amnesic patients with language problems. Language is almost always intact unless there's a comorbid condition like aphasia, which happens, of course. So the acquisition of grammar and grammar rules are there. It's almost impossible, unless you train to be an English teacher, it's almost impossible to explain why we do certain things in, let's say, in English. There are certain things that we learn without knowing that we do so. Okay. And again, why they are implicit? Because you can't use propositions to describe them. I mean, you could, like I'm doing now, but that's not really how it's done. So my favorite exercise is, if you have time, ask one of your significant others, members of your family. Imagine that an alien landed in your living room and you have a cardigan or a jacket, something that's buttons, to put that thing on. Okay, and you can't show it. You have to explain it in words, and it's excruciatingly difficult. While just putting it on and buttoning it is very easy. Okay, so classical conditioning is that type of implicit learning, right? Or implicit memory. Our dog will remember that the bell is associated with food and the dog will salivate. Okay, so this association of unconditioned response with a conditioned stimulus will become implicitly connected and will be automatically retrieved. Again, we talked about it before. We spend a considerable more amount on learning in the memory class, but we don't really have time for it here. Okay, priming. That's a very interesting point. It's described in the textbook for you. So if you have your notebooks with you, we'll get them ready, because I'm going to ask you to do a very short, simple exercise in a minute. So here is how our memory affects our behavior. And it's without our even thinking about it. Again, it's automatic retrieval, right? So you're not aware of the fact that something is priming your behavior, but it happens. Again, when we talked about perception, sensation and perception a month ago, I showed you a bunch of ads that was supposed to prime you to behave in a certain way. We talked about subliminal perception or subliminal persuasion, similar things. That is of the same type. We're just coming back to that. So now we're ready for our little demo. So what I'm going to ask you is to unscramble these 6 words. That is, take these letters and make them into a word. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do so. Okay, Karen, a little fast. Can somebody, so Karen suggests soar for word number 1. Can somebody do a different word for 1? Rose, yes, thank you, Becca. Okay, how about number 2? Different from pails. Petal, thank you, Leroy. All right, number 3, different from talks. Stalk, thank you. Yep, very good. We can do number 4. Easy. Okay, besides Mets. Stem, thank you. Number 5 is easy, right? Who can do number 5? Good, Diamond, thank you. And the last one, leaf. Leaf. Perfect. Well, I mean, Karen didn't give me a chance to show priming. Here is the, thank you, Parker. And there's another possibility, and the possibility is flee. It's okay, Karen, not a problem. The idea is that if you go through rose, petal, stalk, stem, blossoms, leaf should be natural, right? Versus flee. So the idea is that if you're going through the first 5, fail, right? The different fail. If you're going through the first 5 words and they create this sort of idea of a plant, right? A flower, then you should not even be aware of the fact that it could be flea. And that's what priming is. Okay, so you're not responding flea because you're primed to think about flowers. Good. That's it. That's all I had to say about the implicit non-declarative memory. Again, there is much more to say about it. And that's what's good about, well, it's good. What's interesting about it is that it's very rarely affected in amnesia. So when we talk about amnesia a little bit, because we're going to spend most of the October 22nd class on our lab report, we'll talk a little bit about amnesia. And you see that even the most famous case of HM, he was not impaired when it came to procedural memory. When we watched a clip from the story of Clive Waring, a composer and a conductor who was debilitated by encephalitis, he could still conduct his choir, he could still play piano. This is all procedural memory, and it gets, thank God, preserved. All right, now we're ready to move on to the left side, and that's what we will spend all of the time today on. Is our declarative or explicit memory, right? So implicit means unaware of that. Explicit, so im versus ex, right? These are the two Latin prefixes that we use in English a lot. So now we're talking about explicit memory, and here that's Tolving's contribution, is that we have to think about 2 different subtypes, right? So one would be called episodic, or memory for events and their contexts, versus semantic, which is facts. All right, so think about episodic memory as autobiographical memory, and that concerns your personal experiences. So in addition to the actual events in your life, it also allows you to think about the context, that is time and place when the event took place, right? And maybe sort of you're referencing yourself as the agent of that event or experience of that event, right? So if you think about the way the episodic memory looks like, it's something like you describing that event. So you can say, I was happy when I saw, my favorite example again, a hippie touch a debutante in the park on Saturday. So I was happy is your reference to self. The hippie touched a debutante is a fact embedded in time and location. Time was on Saturday and location was in the park. Okay. Well, semantic memory, of course, is different because it is about facts that have nothing to do with your sort of personal experience in life. Oops. Why is it calling me? I don't know. So semantic memories, think of that as your mental lexicon, and it concerns with facts that are context free, right? So It's information that's stored in your memory, and it's in the context, it was acquired in the context, but there is no sort of self-reference in that. It's categorical. It's has something to do with subset superset relationships. When we talk about concepts, we'll get back to that. So things like, here's a typical bunch of examples. You can say I'm tall. Well, because you know some facts about heights. You can also say happy people smile, because that's what we, again, there is no personal context, there is no self-reference, there is no location on time. You also know that hippies from 1980s used to have long hair. You also know that touching can be good or bad, right? And debutante women, young girls who start their life in the sort of high society wear long dresses. You also know that parks have trees and that Saturday follows Friday and precedes Sunday. So all of that is a part of that sentence that I used before. I was happy to see blah, 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 right? So here is your first activity that you can do for this week, is to do an exercise on distinguishing episodic and semantic memory. Just posted for you on a blackboard. Now we're gonna use this framework that we have been using before, and we will continue to use it, called the three-stage approach to memory, that comes in these three stages. And of course, we talked about it from the point of view of short-term memory and working memory, but now we're going to be using it for the long-term memory. So we will have to, again, answer the questions: what is the duration of long-term memory? What is the capacity of long-term memory? And what is its function? And these are much easier questions for LTM than they were for STM, right? Okay, so for encoding, remember we create a record of some kind of perceptual activity. So we have a percept, and that's the representation that we have in memory. And then a bunch of these percepts turn into memory traces over time. And the other term for that is engram, that we talked about in the relationship to Carl Ashley's work in the 1950s with rats and mice, stuff like that. Now in storage, of course, we have that memory trace. It's hanging out there, hopefully forever. And then it will be sort of in a latent state. And whenever we need it, we're going to get to the retrieval stage, and we'll pull out that trace from storage and activate it to do something that is of interest to us. So let's start with encoding. Oops, too far. Okay. So how do we lay down a trace of some event in memory? Again, I want to connect memory to perception. That's one of the beauty of cognitive psychology, that we are sort of thinking of that in stages, well, not stages maybe, but processes that go from the bottom, sensation, all the way, these are low level processes, all the way to the very high level processes. So the highest one is consciousness. Again, unfortunately, we don't have time in this class to talk about phenomenological psychology. That's the branch that studies consciousness. It's basically answers to questions like, who am I? Why am I on this earth? So from sensation, remember sensation, transduction, proximal stimulus, stuff like that, from very low level physical characteristics of the stimulus, all the way to thinking about why I'm here on this earth. What am I doing here? So that's the beauty of cognitive psychology. And if you think about memory, it is connected directly to perception. Okay, so it's a byproduct of perception, really. If you don't perceive anything, there's nothing for you to encode and store. That's beauty. If there is nothing, if you cannot remember because you did not perceive it in the first place, then that's it. Your goose is cooked. So, and again, we talked about different codes. When we talked about working memory, we talked about verbal information, phonological loop, and we talked about visual spatial sketchpad, which would be nonverbal, sort of imagery based kind of information being encoded. So here we're going to be talking about two laws or principles that I will introduce soon that have to do with elaboration and organization. So to encode something properly, okay, and this is just a very general, very vague definition. You have to elaborate on it or you have to organize it. Again, I'm going to give you a bit of a better definitions of these two. And also organizations related to visualizations, which is a part of organization and elaboration. I'm kind of putting it as three, but it really goes through one and two like this. Sort of when you elaborate, you visualize. When you organize, you visualize. And in particular, something that is very important for general life is mnemonics, especially when we don't have a chance to write something down or use our phone, and that happens. When we started last week talking about memory, and even before, I already mentioned to you Hermann Ebbinghaus, first German cognitive psychologist. I mean, he didn't call himself cognitive psychologist, of course, but we talked about his approach to looking at the forgetting curve. He created these long lists of nonsensical syllables that consisted of a consonant, vowel, consonant, and he would memorize the list to perfection, and he would let time go by, and then he will try to recall the list, and normally would not recall it perfectly, of course. He also wanted to make sure that each syllable was recalled in the correct order, which is very difficult. And then he would try to relearn the list, and then he would see how long it would take him to lose 40% of information and so on. Okay. So that gave us what I call the zero law of repetition. The more you rehearse something, repeat, right, the better you'll remember it. So that's the zero law because it works for short-term memory and working memory to a certain degree, but it does not work for long-term memory. So if it's not repetition that helps us memorize things, move them from STM to LTM, what is it then? Okay. So his repetition is something that should be called maintenance rehearsal. That is, it's rote, right? You just repeat the words or the numbers or the phone number or whatever else you're trying to remember. You just repeat it in your loop, in your phonological loop. Now remember, it's only 30 seconds. And then you have to either push it in LTM or lose it. Versus, so this doesn't give us any other connection except for the sound form of these words, right? So this maintenance rehearsal should be distinguished from elaborate rehearsal, and that's what we really want, where you are making an attempt to link this new information, these words that you're trying to remember, or numbers, whatever, to what you already know. Now, what you already know can be very different because you are who you are, or it could be something that everybody else knows. Alphabet or digits, these are universal things, but maybe you have some special knowledge of something that can help you link the new information to what you already know. So this is going to be our first law of memory, the law that applies to this first stage, the encoding stage. Okay. So it's a more deliberate process. So again, I keep telling you guys, I know you're busy, you have other classes and so on and so forth. But if you don't engage with the material of this class or any other class, you're not going to remember much. And engagement means you have to do something, do work. Okay? So it's not if you just take a chapter and read it and highlight it, or take your notes and read and highlight them. That's not going to work. What you need to do as you read the book or read your notes is to give these notes of these sections of the textbook your attention by trying to think of them in a sort of more in a deeper way than just superficial reading, because that doesn't result in any memory at all. So you have to create relations, connections between things that you're trying to memorize. You just not just rehearse them. So perhaps you remember, I'm going to go back for a second, that we talked about an experiment. See you, Justin. Uh, where people were supposed to memorize words, but only the ones that started with the P sound. So there was the usual list. It's verbal learning paradigm. So, desk, book, and then P. And then, I don't know, sky, window, something else, and potato. So the idea is that if people were rehearsing, and what they varied was actually our friend Craig, the same person we'll talk about in a second, they varied the distance between the words that started with P. There could be one word, so you only rehearse it once. Could be 8 words, so you rehearse it for 8 times. And the prediction was that if this maintenance rehearsal works, then words that were rehearsed longer would be remembered better. But the results were absolutely identical. P that was rehearsed once and potato that was rehearsed 8 times were recalled on average 17% of the time. That is, maintenance rehearsal in the verbal learning paradigm did not work at all. So what does? Now here comes a absolutely lovely experiment that I hope we can do on as a demo on Thursday, called levels of processing, or LOP. So again, it's you just have to kind of understand it now without doing that, because we don't have time to do it now, right? So in this experiment, participants are given an instruction first. So, for example, they say, does the word that you will see next, is the word that you will see next in all caps? Or it could be an instruction, does the word that you're going to see next rhyme with the word cave? Or it could be a third type of instruction. Is the word that you're going to see next synonymous to the word, I don't know, bird? So at each of these are called orienting tasks. At each of these 3 levels, people sort of orienting themselves to what they need to do with the word. And these are the 3 very classical coding dimensions or orienting tasks. Again, the same meaning, different terminology. So in the first one, it's an orthography. It's a shape. Is it all caps? Is it lower case letters? Does it sound like something? Does it have the same meaning? So you can say, if the word main is written in all caps, so the answer will be yes. But you don't have to think about it. You just look at it and you see, it's all caps. Does it sound like main? Lane, does it sound like lane? And you say, okay, main lane. Okay, yes, it does. And you're going to say yes. And then you will say something like, nah, I'm thinking for an example. Does the word main, if it's the one that the lion has, um, does it look like something a he lion can have? I don't know, imagining possible. And you would say yes. So you can see that you're processing the same word main at three different types. Of course, you're not giving the person the same word three times. You vary these words. And the prediction is that if you're not looking deeply into the word, your memory is going to be nothing special. When you have to think what the main lane rhyme, then perhaps you're thinking more and your memory should be better. But when you have to think about whether lions have manes, your memory should be the best. So that's the prediction of the levels of processing theory. Okay, instruction or orienting task or coding. It's all the same. And this is what they found. So if you start with shallow visual processing written in caps, your memory is whatever, 12%. If you ask people to think about whether they rhyme, you're going to get much better. It's about 57%. But if you if you tell people to think about the meaning of the words, then they're almost 90%. So you can see that from 12 to 9, well, 80 something to 90, it's a huge difference. The same word. Of course, it's manipulated through different groups of subjects, but you can see that main is going to be so better remembered in the meaning or semantic type of orienting task versus very shallow. So we may do a little exercise on levels of processing on Thursday. All right. So let's finish that piece and then take a break. That gives us the first principle, a law for encoding of memory. So, and here is the stuff in the box for you that you should try to memorize, because all these 7 laws that I'll be talking about today and next week are all in the same form. So memory is a function of. So memory is a function of the extent to which the event is analyzed and related to the pre-existing knowledge at the time of encoding. So let's rephrase that. You have some new stuff that's coming in, words that you have to memorize. Now you have to take this new information that you're memorizing and you're connecting it to something you already know. In the LOP, they provided sort of the crutches, but if you're doing it on your own, what is it that you like? What is it that you know? What is it that you can use to hook up the new stuff to information you already know? There are famous cases. People who run know a bunch of numbers. People who musicians know a bunch of various pieces of music. People who are chess players know a bunch of moves that are sort of grouped together. Think of whatever makes sense to you. If you're not an expert in anything, then use the alphabet or use the digits. You can never forget from 0 to 9. That's not possible. You probably will remember all 26 letters of alphabet no matter what you do. So you take the new information and you hook it to the stuff you already know. Or, as we will see later, you're going to hook the new information to the visual stuff. It's not like you know these images, but you can easily create images, and we have a much, much better memory for images than for words. So memory is a function of how the new information can be linked, how well can be linked to the information you already know, new to old, so to speak. And let's just finish with the definition of elaboration before we take a break. So maybe it is the amount of attention people pay to the event. Maybe it's just time, right? If you spend 5 seconds as opposed to 1. Maybe it's the number of dimensions that you're thinking about. Is it pleasant, unpleasant? Is it pink or is it white? Is it tall or is it short? Okay. Maybe it is the number of links to the pre-existing knowledge if you have a bunch of schemas that you can use. Okay. And to practice and have a look at why maintenance rehearsal is different from elaborate rehearsal, you can do the activity on the blackboard. Okay, it's 11:10. Let's take a 6-minute break until 11:16. If you have a question, stay put and ask me a question. I'm here. All right, that takes us to the second principle. Now, it's very similar to the first one, but there is a subtle difference. So here, let's look at the definition is, so in the elaboration principle, you take the new information and you relate it to what you already know. That's already in your memory. This one is a little different. You take the new information and you try to relate it within itself. That is, if you're learning words, you try to connect the words in that list, as opposed to connecting them to something you already know. So it's a subtle difference. It's still, in this case, will be an organization. You're not, well, you're elaborating too, but you're mostly organizing the information in such a way that it will allow you to recall, in this case, words better. So we're thinking, again, we're still learning the verbal learning paradigm. Okay, so we're talking about words. And in this case, if a list happens to have words that belong to similar categories or same categories, it's much easier to recall them in that way, even though they were not given to you in categories. So think about a grocery list. If you don't have a, you know, an app on your phone where you just punch in all the words, you're trying to remember, oh, from the produce, I need tomatoes and, I don't know, parsley or something. And from the beverage categories, I need iced tea and so on and so forth. So you will try to categorize these words, the items that you need to buy, in clusters, right? And that will give us this second principle. Memory is a function of the way you relate information to itself, the new information to itself at the time of encoding. So here we can think of two ways of doing that. One we already discussed, chunking. That is, you take the information that's coming in and will easily exceed your short-term memory, even if it's 4 or 7 more likely. But if you chunk, then the number of chunks becomes smaller. Therefore, it increases the capacity of your short-term memory. Or this is what we would do for categorization, called hierarchical organization of the information. So let's have a look. Chunking already is something that we know. Okay, so here is the same 9 digits, right? Given to you in chunks of 3. So this is 9. That's above 7 plus minus 2, really. And this is only 3. So, and we're used to sort of memorizing digits by 3 because our area codes are like this. All right, so this is more difficult, the 9 separate digits versus the same digits grouped in 3s. Okay, so this is all new information, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to relate the first 3 among themselves, the next 3 among themselves. And perhaps, of course, you're also using elaboration if one of these groups happens to be an area code that you call. I think 516 is Philadelphia or something. That becomes trivial. Okay. Um, Here is something, again, we really don't have much time to do that, but I'm asking you to think if you were a participant in the study that would give you these words. There's only, what, 12 of them, right? If you were to use the organization principle, the second principle of memory of encoding, what could you do with these 12 words? Either unmute yourself or type in the chat. How would you apply the organization principle to memorize these 12 words? Oh, Long Island. Okay, thank you, Leroy. Chunking still, okay, maybe, but there is a better solution. Group together, right, Becca? So give us,
Categorizing like
uh-huh,
animals,
uh-huh,
colors,
uh-huh,
clothing.
and close, right?
Yep.
So good. So you would say, these are my new 12 words. I have to remember them. What if I remember them as animals? So we will have lion, mouse, an elephant as one category. Then we will think about colors. So we will have orange, amber, purple, right? Then we will have body parts. So we have foot, finger. Where's the third one? The mouth, right? And the last one will be clothing. So we will have something like coat, pants, and tie. So now instead of having 12 items to remember, we have to remember 4 categories. Much, much easier. But of course, you have to figure this out. And somebody is throwing these words at you. If I were to do that under normal time conditions, will you be able to notice that? So you kind of have to train yourself to think about, well, okay, I'm in this biology class and they're giving me the 12 cranial nerves. How can I remember them? How can I impose this organization? That is, can I connect the names of these nerves, cranial nerves, to something that I already know? So I'm not asking you to do that because we don't really have time for this, but grouping together, category clustering is a very, very powerful principle that helps you remember information at the time of encoding. Okay, so these 4 categories will be useful and it will make these words memorable. Now, of course, you would say these are all sort of baby examples, like 12 words, and why do we need that? But there are many, many circumstances. You'll be surprised when you have to memorize things. So thinking of these 2 principles, elaboration and organization, will make your memory much, much stronger and less dependent on your devices. Okay, here's the famous experiment by Gordon Bower, where people were given, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 6 times 4. That's 24 words. One possibility would be to do just what we did, right? As to come up with some clusters, which there will be 4, right? Another possibility that I'm not discussing yet, but will be in a minute, is that perhaps, and I've had students who've done that in the past, perhaps you could create a story, right, that would connect these words among themselves, the organization principle, and will also give us a way of visualize this list, giving us the elaboration principle as well. So imagine that a boy saw a bird and gave it some bread, and that was all happening at the church. Suddenly, a tiger from behind the hill appeared, making boys think about home, and so on, right? So you could come up with a way to organize the information, not necessarily by clusters, but by a narrative. And we as humans are extremely good at narratives, and we are extremely happy with narratives. We love stories. One of the best way to sort of think about how you could do something is, instead of giving a lecture, is to tell a story. And it, it can be done. So, but again, Bauer's experiment is precisely about the organization principle, where one group was just given 2 minutes to memorize these 24 words, and then they were asked to count backwards from 300. You know what it does, right? Because it's more than 30 seconds, it erases everything from your short-term memory. If you did not move it to the long-term memory, you're going to lose all these words. While group two, before they were given the words, were taught this uh, acronym. You know, an acronym is when you use the first letters of each word. And the acronym was BFNAP. And it stands for body parts, B, right? Food, F, nature, animals, A, right? And PP, places and process things. So now you can predict, right, what's going to happen with people's memories. In the first condition, okay, who can type in the chat, what would be the approximate number of words people remembered? Well, that's the short-term memory capacity, which is 7 plus minus 2. So 7 to 9 words. But in the second condition, in the second group, where people memorize the acronym first, BFNAP, it's like a name, right? You think about Skinner, right? Or something. People's memory was almost perfect. The same words. Okay? So giving people this hierarchical organization was an extremely powerful way to help them memorize the words. Again, this is just what Bauer's experiment looked like in terms of the design. And if you're interested, I'm giving you another chance to listen to a famous psychologist. Gordon Bauer is still again with us in his 80s. I think he's in his 80s, yeah. In 2011, he gave an interview to the APA representative, talking about this kind of memory research. Again, as usual, watch the interview and write a summary or ask a bunch of questions that are related to this interview. And a very, very interesting person, Gordon Bauer. Okay, now is the fun part. So if we now combine these principles, for example, and add visualization to that, our memory becomes almost perfect. That's amazing. So the word that we use for that is called mnemonics, where M is not pronounced, you start off with an N. And mnemonics is just a device, or, you know, a rule of thumb or something, a trick that helps you store the information in memory, and that comes from the Greek word memory capability. So what is it? Well, we have a bunch of mnemonics that have been sort of invented and used all over the time when we didn't have cell phones with us. People had to memorize public speeches, so they had to, we still have to do that, and we still have to memorize things like, I don't know, the names of the 5 Great Lakes in the United States, or the names of the notes on the treble clef staff. And that's, I think my example is precisely that. Let's see. And there's also things that you can use or invent, or somebody taught you that you don't think belongs to sort of general knowledge. It's going to be episodic stuff, right? So here is the famous one for the colors of the rainbow. Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. As long as you memorize Roy G. Biv, you will always remember the 7 colors, and you will always remember the order, which is important. Again, we continue to use that tried and true for many years. Here is the notes on the treble clef, E, G, B, D, F, 5 lines if you're a musician. There is one, see if anybody knows that, there is one for the names of the planets in our solar system. Does anybody know this mnemonic? Type it in. Okay. Uh-huh. Uh, Becca, and which one does it stand for, the one that you're using? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally for math. Okay. PEMDAS. Jeffrey, what does it stand for? That's for math. Okay. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Perfect. Yay. Okay. So for the never eat soggy waffles. What does that stand for, Raphael? Best clef. Okay. Awesome. Good. All right. So the for the planets, my very earnest mother, and so on. That is Mercury, Venus, Earth, March. Something about pizza. I don't remember. Uh, does anybody know any other mnemonics in addition to the ones you guys already provided? Perhaps something personal that your parents taught you or one of your elementary school teachers taught you that you would be willing to share with us? I don't think I have any. Okay. That's all right. I mean, I'm saying that if somebody has something neat, that would be good. You can also create, if you want, a thread in your an entry in your individual blog and give us or give me a bunch of mnemonics or one or two or explain it. That would be fun. Okay, so it helps you, but of course it helps you to memorize a certain preset list of names in this case, right? And they have to be remembered in order. That's critical. So, okay, here is something that has been used with children for quite a long time. And if you would like, if you're interested in the sort of this kind of memorization to help you with your work, Sally G's, especially your schoolwork, you could try to memorize this set of 10 words called peg word method. So think of these. Well, we obviously know the numbers, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's easy. Now, if we connect each of the numbers with another word, okay, which rhymes, so it shouldn't be too difficult. So we say 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a tree, 4 is a door, 5 is a beehive, 6 is stick, 7 is heaven, 8 is gate, 9 is fine, 10 is hen. So now, once you have memorized that, that's not too difficult. Then you're going to be using the organization principle by trying to take the new words that are coming your way. Again, my favorite example, 12 cranial nerves. And you will try, or the list may be easier. You go shopping, you have a list. So now what you have to do, you have to take this word. Let's say your first word in your list is tomato, right? So now you're going to take 1 as a bun, and you think of a bun as an image, and you think of tomato as an image, and you try to connect these two images together in a way that they will become um, unusual, right? So if you just slice tomato and put it on a bun, nah, you may remember, may not, because it's not vivid enough. But imagine, I have to think of an example that, I don't know, the bun and the tomato are dancing hip hop together. They have little legs and little arms. So if you now take your list of, in this case, 10 words that you have to buy, and connect each one of them with one of these pegs. Pegs are those words from 1 to 10, by creating vivid, unusual, even, porno images. That's fine, as long as they are memorable. So what will happen when you get to the store, whichever store you shop at, ShopRite and something else, you will say, oh, what was the first item on my list? Oh, it was, uh, you know, the bun, one is a bun, dancing with a tomato. Okay, I remember it's tomato. And you will be able to get your entire list without much of a difficulty. It takes, once you learn this technique, it takes a little bit of practice to use it. And of course, you can see that if you have longer lists, it becomes an issue. What do you do with number 11? Uh, but that's a separate question. Something as short as 10 will be remembered perfectly, especially if you think that your memory is not particularly great and you complain about it. If you have parents who think that the memory is not great, or your grandma, your grandpa, you can teach them these little mnemonic tricks, and they'll be surprised how well the stuff works. The other famous one, I'm just gonna tell you without actually doing that, is called method of loci. The word loci is the word plural from locus. Locus, not the locus that descends on us, but the locus as a location. So method of loci, plural, method of many locations, is a way to do the same stuff, organization, impose organization on a new list of words by using locations. Now, usually the best uh, locations come from your house or your apartment, wherever you live. So if you're following me for a second, you could kind of close your eyes for a second and imagine your front door. And then you'll take your list. Again, I'm using tomato and whatever else. So now your first location is the front door of your house or of your apartment. Now you have to create a visualization between tomato and that front door. Maybe it's all splashed with rotten tomatoes, something like that. Then you open the door, you're in your house or in your apartment. Where are you now? Which, obviously, you are in some kind of entry hall or a vestibule or whatever it is. Maybe you're looking at the stairs if you're in the house, or maybe you're looking at the kitchen if you're in a small apartment. It doesn't matter. But you can walk, quote unquote, through your apartment or your house, and you can select locations, loci, right? And you can drop the words that you're trying to remember in these locations by creating crazy, vivid images. So if you are in the entry hall and maybe you have I don't know, a bench there where you take your shoes off, something. You can, and your second item is milk, you can create a strange imagery between the bench and the milk, like the bench is being drowned by the milk or something. And you go through your entire house, and depending on the size of your house or your apartment, you can get many, many locations. You can get 10, you can get 20. We have done it once in the memory class with the locations on campus at CSI that everybody knows. As you enter from the Victory Boulevard, you have the guards booth, and then you have the bus stop on the left, and then you have a left turn that takes you into parking lot 6, and then there is a little observatory there. So we once created a list of, I forgot, was it like 28 items that we remember? I mean, we, I say students, remembered a week after that we broke for a week, came back, and almost everybody could list 28 words based on locations on campus. Now, it comes from sort of the ancient story of uh, a Greek orator, somebody who speaks public speeches, who was present at the fest in a nobleman in Rome. I think it was in Rome. And there was something bad going on among these people who were guests. So this person was called outside as if somebody was asking him to step out. And it turns out that the two gods wanted to save him, because at the moment as he stepped out, the roof of the house collapsed and buried everybody who was present at this banquet. So then they tried to sort out who these people were. This guy remembered everybody's name and everybody's location because that's how he memorized them in during the banquet that he was present at. So sometimes it's known as Memory Palace. If you Google that, you'll find a bunch of interesting stories on using method of loci under these circumstances. One of the things that I posted for you is I'm looking for the book. I don't think I have it here. Oh, must be in my office. There is a well-known American journalist whose name is Joshua Foer. I'm going to type his name. Joshua Foer. Joshua Foer was just a normal human being with normal 7 plus minus 2 memory capacity. And then he learned about a particular event called the mental uh, Olympics or memory Olympiad, where people compete on memory tasks. And these are not these little things that I'm discussing with you. These are feats of memory, like memorizing the entire set of cards in the order that they were given to you. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. So he interviewed uh, one of the champions, Dominic O'Brien, about this. And Dominic said, look, anybody can become a mental athlete and do well. And Joshua said, well, not me. And the guy challenged him. He said, get yourself a coach who will coach you on mental tasks and then participate in the event a year after. So Joshua Foer actually took a year off. Well, I guess he was doing it simultaneously with his life. And he went uh, and found himself a coach, went through this very intense training for a year, then participated in this Olympics and won. And he wrote a book, Walking, is it? Moonwalking with Einstein, I think it's called. I think that's what it's called. Unfortunately, like I said, I have the book in my office. Moonwalking with Einstein. I think that's what it's called. Where he documented his year being trained to become a memory champion. So, and his idea, of course, you need some motivation, some time. Anybody can do that. And method of loci is one of the methods that these mental athletes use when they have to memorize like 56 cards. All right. It's very interesting stuff if you ever want to learn about mnemonics. Another one, I'm just giving you a bunch of mnemonics that people use, is the keyword. If any of you is still in the process of taking a foreign language class, it's only, I think, applicable to people who are doing bachelors of art. You can learn a bunch of vocabulary items, that's words of a new language, using this method of keyword. And this is the famous article from 1975, dear to my heart, because it's about learning Russian vocabulary, where you can use, again, the same principles of organization and visualization, and using your native language to hook up the words of the language you're learning to them. So you're going to be doing both elaboration and organization simultaneously. That's the keyword method. And it has been rehearsed. It has been researched many, many times. And the person who is uh, sort of linked to this is known as the dual code theory, is Pivio, where he says you can memorize things as long as you code them twice, so to speak. You will code them verbally as words, but you also will code them as images, because our memory for images is incredible. In one of the 1998 experiments, people were presented over multiple sessions with 10,000 images. And then they were presented with a recognition task. That is, they were given two images, one of which was the one they saw, the other one wasn't. The accuracy, 10,000 images, was 98%. So anything that you do to memorize, that you transfer into visual stuff, is going to pay off big time. So do that. And when we were in chapter 2, was it chapter 2? Right. I gave you this little exercise to think about how you could memorize the components of the brainstem using the Pavlov's really freaking mad, that gives you a chance to recall pons, reticular formation, and medulla as components of the brainstem. Go back to chapter 2 for a bunch of others. So let's summarize the encoding principles and move on to storage. So elaboration principle and organization principle. Memory is a function of the extent to which you connect the new information to the information you already know, elaboration. And organization, memory is a function of how you connect the new information within itself, creating clusters, categories, stories, whatever not. So now we are in storage. And it's sort of an easy thing to think. What happens once you have encoded information? Well, what happens? One possibility is that it's there as long as you need it, maybe forever. When the time is right, you need to get to that memory trace, you're going to get it. However, the other possibility is that you forget, right? During this retention interval, this is what storage is. It's kind of a retention interval, right? You encoded stuff, holding on to it, then you retrieve it because you need to use it. So retention interval is between encoding and retrieval, so during storage. And this retention interval can be, a minute, a week, a year, or your entire life. And again, either you hold on to the stuff or you lose it, that is, you forget. And this is what we already saw using the data obtained 150 years ago by Hermann Ebbinghaus in his forgetting curve, that shows that within 1 hour, 40 minutes to 1 hour after encoding information, you're going to lose 40% of it. So if you don't do anything. Now, if you do something, that's separate. If you want me to talk about that, we can talk about it. But if you don't do anything, a whole day later, it's going to be only 30% of the information that you learned. 3 days later, it's going to be about 25. So you spent a lot of money going to a seminar or to a class, and in just a very short amount of time afterwards, 75% of the information will be erased. That's very sad. But the good news is the 25 will stay for a very long time. This is actually years here. So 30 years later, this is the a famous experiment by Berwick where he and his team came to a high school reunion. Well, came to several high school reunions, I guess. And they tested people on their knowledge of Spanish in a Spanish class that they took when they were in high school. So the beauty of this design is it was the same uh, curriculum. It's the same high school, different people, of course. Some of them graduated a year ago, others 5 years ago, and there were people who graduated 30 years ago. And when uh, the team gave them the Spanish words to recognize, turns out they could still recognize 25% of them. Amazing. Okay. So nothing, not everything is lost. Let's put it this way. So now that allows us to think of the principles that apply to the storage stage. We talked about two principles of the encoding stage. Okay. And this is known as time dependency principle. That's easy, right? Memory is a function of the retention interval between the time of encoding and time of retrieval. The shorter the interval, the better the retrieval, right? The longer the interval, the worse the retrieval will be. And that gives us a way to think about forgetting. I mean, why it happens, what are possible explanations for why we forget. And there are 4 hypotheses. What time is it? No, we're good. Okay. There are 4 hypotheses that we'll talk about. And here they are. We have decay theory, consolidation failure, displacement, and interference. Now, it's not that every single one of them um, is, no, it's not like only one of them is correct. Let's put it this way. All 4 seem to contribute, but the probably most obvious and most important for us is the interference theory of forgetting. Of course, well, there are exceptions. Let's put it this way. Certain things will help you remember things better than others. So think about decay. It's like, I think the best sort of metaphor is think about going to the beach and you have the sand and you have the waves. Let's say it's a tide. You walk on the sand, you get your footprints in the sand, and then the wave comes and sort of erases your footprints. That's decay. Just passing of time, all right? Nothing, nothing is doing except for time. So the idea here is that without any active rehearsal, right? Okay, memory simply fades away over time. Or think about an echo in the building, right? You yell, and you get an echo. It will disappear. Think about if you have old photos in your house. They fade. They become yellowish and disintegrate. It's just plain uh, passage of time. Good examples are examples of what we did 2 weeks ago when we talked about, maybe a week ago when we talked about echoic and iconic memory, sensory memory, that is visual and auditory and visual memories. They only last for a very short period of time. You don't need to do anything, they just disappear by the virtue of decay. That's an example of that. All right, so it's there. One of the possible explanations. You don't need to do anything, it's just going to go away. Consolidation failure is a different way of thinking about it. It's also a variation of a decay theory, but it assumes that when you encode something, when you encode a memory trace, it does not happen instantaneously. That is, here you are thinking about something, now it's already in your memory. You actually have to um, take time to create the memory trace. That is, you have to sort of consolidate. Okay, so that's why there is this well-known phenomenon that you should sleep on something and you would remember it better in the morning, because apparently what happens is the consolidation of memory trace happens during the time of your sleep, and therefore if you sleep on something you'll remember it much better than if you didn't. Okay, so if things happen, not necessarily interference in the proper sense of the word, but life goes on, you may not be able to um, just do something to this memory trace. So it's a little different from decay, but in sort of in the same ballpark. Decay is you don't have to do anything. For consolidation, you have to, you unconsciously, your body or your mind is working on that. And we get the evidence for that in traumatic retrograde amnesia. What happens, people get concussions. So hopefully we'll get some time to talk about it next Thursday, the 22nd. That is something that is known well now with American football. Players that experience concussions, which happen a lot, may get this very short traumatic retrograde amnesia. And if you, of course, I don't think you guys do that, but if you're riding your motorcycle without a helmet and suddenly you have an accident and you fall and you hit your head, hopefully you're still alive. The traumatic impact on the brain could result in this retrograde amnesia. It could be a few minutes before the accident, could be a few hours. Rarely, don't think about the movies that show people losing memory of the entire life. This is all just a good story, but not true. Usually it's a relatively short period of time before the accident. And presumably, one of the explanations is that the consolidation has been disrupted. Displacement, um, another way of thinking that you don't do anything, but that, remember the channel from STM or working memory into LTM is limited. So if something else comes in, it just sort of kicks out the old information. Not too many people actually believe in that so much. It's just one of the historic theories on about forgetting. Well, again, 7 plus minus pieces of information. If new stuff comes in, it's going to be, it needs space. It needs to go somewhere. So it's going to displace the old stuff. The one that we really want to talk about, and I think that's what we will start with next time, is the theory of interference. So most cognitive psychologists today believe it's a combination of decay and interference that work the best. So nothing, the idea is that nothing happens during encoding. Encoding is fine. But then the new memories acquired during the retention interval, right, somehow get in the way with old memories. So it's especially noticeable when you talk about words, right? So if you have one list, let's say the list that we studied last week and the list that I showed you today with 4 categories, 3 words, that is animals, body parts, clothing, and whatever else it was. Right? Now what will happen is that this new list that we are studying today will, if you still remember some from the old list from last week, this would interfere, either in this case giving you retroactive interference. In case the old list interferes with the new one, you're going to get what's called a proactive interference. See a question from Nori. The difference between decay and consolidation is that decay is completely passive. The time just goes by. Consolidation means that the memory trace is not created immediately. It needs time to sort of gel it. And if the time is not available, there will be a break in consolidation. So they are similar. It's only the matter of how much time goes by for decay versus consolidation. And the paradigm that we will use is the Brown-Peterson paradigm. Let's, in the remaining 4 minutes, let's quickly do that to give you an idea what it means for the interference theory of forgetting to work. So what you have to do, it's going to be like 5 slides. You have to read the 3 consonants. And consonants are B, V, D, G, M, L, things that are different from vowels. Then the consonants are replaced with a number. You have to count backwards by 3 from this number. We've done that before, so it is familiar task for you. It's an interference task. So here's an example. So BPT, you have to memorize the consonants. Then you're going to get a number, right? In this case, 176, and you have to count backwards by 3. 173, 170, 167. It is important that you do it out loud if you can, or if nobody's around you for whom you would be a nuisance. And then you stop. So let's try just a couple of these, a bit more than a couple. So get ready. You have to read out the 3 consonants and then count backwards by 3 from the number that you will see after the consonants. You don't write them down, you just try to remember them. So 369, 366. Now you write them down. 782, 779. Okay, so that's the idea. The idea would be that I'm going to stop now because I don't want us to go into doing this. All right, so the idea would be that if this retention interval during which you count is long or longer, your memory will be worse because the counting task will interfere with the task to remember the consonants. Okay, our time is up. I'll see you guys on Thursday. Please remember to do the Nairn's article and answer 8 questions and be ready to discuss it on Thursday and convey it to your partners. The class is over. I'll see you Thursday.